So thank you for having me. So first of all, I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we gather here today and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that to anyone in the audience of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander origin. So I'm just going to keep this nice and casual today. And when Siobhan said that she was surprised that I would drive up to Newcastle to come and do this in person, any excuse to come up to Newcastle. I still feel like this is home. This is probably the place I've spent most of the largest period of my life studying here and working here, and have a very deep connection to the people and to the Hunter region. So I want to start just with a little bit of my journey, my experience, but I really want to get to questions and hear a little bit about what people in the audience are experiencing, challenges they're having, and anything that obviously I can answer for you. I have had a bit of a strange career. I did start out being a doctor. I still am a doctor, I shouldn't say that. Was a doctor, I am a doctor. I came here when I was 17 years of age and started medicine at the University of Newcastle, an undergraduate degree, so it was very green. I remember getting my first share house in Waratah and thinking, what am I doing here? What is this place? But it grew on me, and ended up realising that you needed to live up this end of town to really experience the beauty of Newcastle. But I did my undergraduate degree here, finished, worked at the John Hunter and at the Mater, so became familiar with all the hospitals around here, even the Royal Newcastle, which many of you too young to remember, but that was a hospital before it was a nice block of apartments. So got a real exposure to all the different parts of medicine. When I was working across the health system, every specialty that I went into, I was passionate about and thought, I could be a surgeon, or I could be a GP, or I could be a dermatologist, like everything I enjoyed. But the more and more I went around, the more and more I saw problems in the health system. Everywhere I went, I kept seeing how things could be done better. And it was a really difficult position to be in, because in a medical degree, like many other sort of professional degrees, you kind of enter a system that is designed a certain way, and your job is to come in, fit in and follow the path that everyone else has followed before you. You don't really want people coming in and disrupting. So disruption wasn't a good thing if you came into the medical system. You know, we see in startups disruption is good, definitely not in the health system. It was seen as you're a troublemaker if you try and, you know, give feedback or you want to change a process. But I remember working at a small clinic down the road on Derby Street, and we had these paper forms, and all I wanted to do was turn that paper form onto the computer and said, look, I can do it myself. I will just make tick boxes. It'll be much easier. We don't have this paper, we don't lose it. And oh my God, it took me 18 months to go through the bureaucracy of the organisation, and at the end they said no. And it made me actually even more driven to try and fix problems in healthcare. But what I did first was got a really broad exposure of the whole system. So I worked in hospitals, worked in the primary care sector, I worked for Awabakal in Indigenous health, went out to rural parts, to Muswellbrook, Singleton, and worked in prison health. You name it, I had a go. And it didn't matter where I went, the problems were just pervasive. So I got a great opportunity when I was working here to work for a company, Health Services Australia, that then got bought out by Medibank. And the great thing about being introduced into the corporate sector is the corporate world is much more driven to innovate and improve, because they've got a commercial imperative. So for them, disruption might be a good thing, because it's, you know, the next commercial opportunity for them, or they get more efficiencies and, you know, they get more financial sustainability. So I started to realise that, you know, working for a corporate may not be a bad thing, and so I ended up being employed by Medibank. And it wasn't the insurance side, I was employed by the health solutions business that was really looking at how do we divest into new types of businesses to increase our footprint and our profile and not just be known as a health insurer. So for me, the great thing about that opportunity was that at the time they had also bought a company that was doing telehealth, so telephone and online services. And it wasn't particularly technologically advanced. It was, pick up a phone and speak to a patient. But I was still like, wow, that's amazing that you don't have to have someone sitting in front of you to help and make a difference. And the service was pretty impactful because we would sit in a call centre or in our own homes, and we would in the middle of the night be speaking to somebody on a remote mining site in the middle of WA who had no access to healthcare. And I remember one night this gentleman who had really bad cellulitis, and his whole leg was inflamed and he couldn't actually, so it's a skin infection for those of you not medical, and he had a fever, and he's like, I'll get in the car, I'm in the middle of this mine site, it's the middle of the night, there's nowhere to go, but I'll get in my car and I'll start driving down to the nearest town, which will take me about 5 hours, and there might be a nurse there. And I thought, that's the worst possible thing you can do. You've got a leg that's not functioning, and if you have an accident in the middle of the night. But luckily for them, they had a medical kit there, and we were able to go through the chest, what they call medical chest, find some antibiotics in there, find some pain relief, and get him treated in the middle of the night without actually physically seeing this man. And he managed to stay there, get better in the morning, and someone came and got him. And it was moments like that that made me realise that technology can change access to healthcare and can change outcomes. And it wasn't great technology, like I said, it was a telephone. And we've been doing this, since the early 1900s with two-way radios with the RFDS, but it was actually putting this into a service that was going to be at scale and sort of considered a mainstream health service that really made me realise the impact of technology and innovation on healthcare. And the more I did that, the more ambitious I got about using technology in healthcare. And so then we branched out to let's try video, and it was like, wow, this is so cool. I think about now, we just use video all the time, but back then it was quite a new concept. And I started working with an American company called American Well, who had video platforms in the US that they were using for healthcare. And we were trying to figure out how we brought that here to be part of this service. We had lots of resistance to video. Nobody wanted to use it. We couldn't implement it. We gave up. And then they said, okay, well, let's try another innovation. Let's try prescribing over the phone. Oh my God, it was, like I was killing all the doctors in Australia, but it was so much resistance. It was like, how dare you? This is very specific to a doctor sitting in a room with a patient, and you can't do remote scripts. Got a lot of pushback from all of the peak bodies, so we kind of gave up. As my time went on there, I became more and more senior in the role, and then realised that I needed to probably spread my wings, and I was lucky enough to be headhunted by Telstra, and Telstra Health came to me and they said, we're a telco, we're buying up all these health IT companies and we're going to fix the whole system. And you've no idea how appealing that sounds when someone says they're going to fix the whole system. I should have been a little bit more cluey about that, because I was having lots of troubles with my telephone line. I didn't know how they were going to fix the health system, but it was worth a shot, right? If anyone had money and had influence, Telstra did. So I kind of went over just going, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm a doctor. I'm going into the telco environment. I don't know what this means. But the great thing was the opportunity they were giving me was to build and construct a telehealth service. And this service was to be done in combination with a Swiss company called Medgate. And so I was going to get some international exposure, and I was very excited about that. And I had this fantastic opportunity to work with these guys internationally who had built centres in the Middle East and in parts of Europe and Asia. And we did a startup. So basically it was a startup within a corporate environment, so you have capital, but everything else you have to do from scratch. Quickly realised that I love entrepreneurship and moved over from the CMO, where I came in as a Chief Medical Officer, into the CEO role. And then panicked and went, oh my God, I need to do an MBA because no one's going to take me seriously. How can I run a company if all I've got is a medical degree? And I'll tell you all now, you don't need an MBA to run a company. So just save you, a couple of years and some money. But obviously if it's at the University of Newcastle, you should do it. Just a plug for the uni. But it's not a prerequisite to running a company. Most of what you learn is on the job. And I learnt that my experience, day in, day out, trying to sell the business to people, doing business development, managing staff, trying to work out sort of the financial sustainability of the organisation, work out, how we're going to grow. All of that just comes from day to day, just hard slog and actually working in a business. But I did the MBA, had a great experience, it was an international one, so got to experience what it's like setting up businesses all over the world. And if you get a chance, definitely worth some of the places that I got to go is Silicon Valley, which obviously everyone wants to go to, but it's worth going if you get a chance. Got to go to Israel, Startup Nation, and definitely another place that I would recommend going if you get an opportunity. We got to go to Cambridge, went to India, and a few other spots around the place. But the great thing about that is just you start to understand what is required of a really strong ecosystem to drive entrepreneurship and innovation, because those countries are certainly world leading in terms of what they pump out, but you see what you need, and this whole co-location of corporates with VCs, with incubators, with industry, and all of that in universities, research institutions. You kind of need that whole group to be able to move things forward, and which is great that we're starting to do it on sort of smaller levels in parts of Australia, and I'm seeing that happen here in the Hunter, which is great. So after I did the MBA, I got an opportunity to help set up a business in the Philippines, which was similar to the telehealth service here, but we got to do it in a different market, and that was a true startup. There was no corporate backing, and so again, that was the hard slog of getting capital, of having to build something from scratch, and also in a completely different setting, culture, health system. But the interesting thing about that was that I had the opportunity to be working in two businesses at the same time who were delivering the same services, but watching one really struggle commercially and one really flourish. And it made me realise that your market is everything. Where you're going into, what their pain points are, what you're solving for, who's going to be willing to pay for the service was the game changer between the two services. So one, 4 years on was still, burning cash. The other one, 6 months was profitable. So, and we make this assumption that if you build something in the Western world, so everyone wants to go to the US or to Europe, but I'd say don't discount Asia, because you have volume and you may not have, a high propensity for people to pay for services, but you have a lot of pain points that need to be solved, and you have large volumes of people that need access to services. And this is, applicable not just to healthcare, but to lots of other industries as well. So we're in a really prime position in Australia to be kind of the gateway to Asia, and I would really like to see more translation of what we do here into the Asian market, because I also think Asia looks at Australia as this, shining beacon of, quality and integrity, and they want to follow what we do, and so we should use that and leverage that. But after having done the business in the Philippines, which was great and successful, and we actually exited that business to the Swiss company that was part owners of the Australian business, so it's all connected. I was sort of figuring out what to do next, and I left and started to hang around with a lot of startups and did a lot of consulting work with people who had great ideas, who just needed help understanding how business works, or needed connections into the corporate sectors, because by then I had a lot of contacts. I did some work for NIB here as the head of clinical innovation. It's also an excuse to come back to Newcastle regularly, because I was Sydney based by then, and started to connect NIB to startups and realised that that was a really great sort of niche area that not many people worked in, where they had the corporate connections but could also see the innovation that was happening on the ground and be able to connect the two. So I'd hear this difficult problem that NIB was facing, and then I would say, oh my God, I spoke to a founder yesterday who's building exactly that. How do I put you in touch and save NIB having to build something from scratch to solve that problem? And now it's great to see that a lot of those startups have got contracts and things within sort of corporate settings and also within government, because that was another connection area that I had. So I sort of essentially became a consultant working across the sector. But as I realised the challenges that I could fix, some of the challenges I could fix, like I could help them get connections, I could help them build a business, find team members, understand regulatory, understand sort of the landscape for the healthcare system, decision makers. procurement processes. The thing that I couldn't fix was capital. Like, I didn't have billions of dollars that I could say, here, let me just help you, with your startup. And that's when the brainchild of Australian Medical Angels happened. So I was with a colleague of mine who ran a group of doctors who were interested in investing. So Investing for Doctors, great name. So it was basically doctors who had money who would talk about where to put their money. And as I was reading through a lot of the posts in the group, it was like, I'm on to my third Tesla, or I want to buy another holiday property here. And I was just like, hey, hang on a minute. These guys should be putting that money towards something more productive. So we came up with this idea to try and get the doctors to funnel their money into startups, because that was something they didn't get access to. Most of them didn't even know what a startup was. So we started this offshoot group called Australian Medical Angels, of which we took sophisticated investors who understood, sort of the risk they would take in startups, because we all know how risky that game is. But these days, property's risky too. So and the stock market. So we were trying to educate them at the same time as find ways to spend their money on something that was going to have an impact on them. So it was really fascinating to watch, a dermatologist invest in a skin cancer technology and think, that's going to make a difference to my job in 5 years. So how do I get in early, have some skin in the game, be able to shape the product, and feel incentivized to use it and promote it to all of my my colleagues. And so it was a great model. We built the first, I think, I actually don't think there was a lot of global groups like that. I actually recently had an email from somewhere in India saying, we've decided to copy your model and build medical angels in India. And I think there's groups now internationally that are doing it. But it's not just in healthcare. There's a lot of other industries that are starting to realise that subject matter experts investing into their own sector adds so much value. And it's not just money, because nowadays people don't just want money. There's there's plenty of money around in venture capital, but they want smart money, that sort of cliche word of smart money, but it's about what networks can you open me up to, who can you connect me with, how can you help me scale my business. So we were able to do that from a healthcare perspective. So we built that, we got the attention of Launch Vic, ended up getting some grant funding from the Victorian government to try and grow that investment sector in Victoria, but we were working nationally across Australia. What we underestimated was when we got the grant and suddenly we got publicity, because we worked very much under the radar. We just got inundated. I had no idea how many health tech startups there were out there, but literally I get, a couple of decks a day. Like, it's crazy. And I never realised that so many people were interested in fixing problems in the healthcare system. And this was a part-time, and Greg knows this, one of my very part-time roles. Greg's known me for, 15 years. So it was a part-time thing, and we didn't have staff, and we were trying to, deal with all of the onslaught of people wanting access. But it showed us that we were onto something, that we were entering a niche area where people didn't have easy access to capital, and they wanted that strategic advice as well. So Angels grew, but I started to get a little bit restless of how do I get more money into healthcare faster? And luckily I was just keeping my ear out for opportunities, and then got contacted by a group in WA who will stay nameless, who wanted to invest some money into health tech. And I went and had conversations with them and realised that there was a real interest from the VC world to start focusing on healthcare, and they didn't have a lot of expertise in the traditional VCs to feel comfortable putting money into healthcare companies, because they didn't really understand a lot of what we did, or the system or the market. And then opportunistically, I sat on a board with somebody from Main Sequence who said, why would you go there when you can come and work with us? And I was like, wow, I never really thought about going and working in venture as a doctor. But I realised it was kind of the answer to my problem of how do I just make things happen faster, and who's got access to money, and who doesn't need to go out and syndicate for every deal, can just make a decision and get things moving really fast. And COVID was really an eye-opener for me, because I watched how fast innovation can happen when we get rid of all the regulatory hurdles, when funding isn't a problem. Temporarily it wasn't a problem. Obviously now we're in, $3 trillion worth of debt, but at the time it was just throw money at whatever. You built an app, I mean, who used the COVID app? I mean, how much money went into that? Oh, you built an app? Great, we'll chuck money at you. You built a point of care test? We'll throw money at it. And I thought, wow, so if you have money and you can, help with the regulatory, sort of hurdles, you can make innovation happen really fast, because so much happened during COVID that has really changed what we do in healthcare. So I've ended up now working at Main Sequence, come in as a principal to learn the ropes of venture capital, still work as a doctor, and still wearing lots of different hats in terms of trying to still help the whole ecosystem. But my real passion is making sure that there is an impact from all of this investment into healthcare, and that we're spending money on the right things, because I don't know if any of you have been watching the media recently. Every single day there's something to do with our health system, with doctors rorting ReadyCare, with neurosurgeons doing bad things. I mean, it's just telling me that we're heading towards a crisis in healthcare, where we've got a medical workforce problem, we've got a sustainability problem, we've got more demand than supply, and we don't have the resources to deliver. And the thing that's going to solve it is technology and innovation. So I'm really here to kind of keep pushing, driving that agenda forward, and working with everyone in the system to try and make that happen. So I'm going to stop there, because there's a lot more I could talk about, but I'd really like to just get on to some conversations and questions. So do you want to, I'll let you...
I'll pass the mic around, because I'm going to throw straight to the floor. Usually we go to the question, we have people ask Bridget. We've got a nice audience today, and people I know that are very interested in healthcare. So who wants to ask the first question? I'll pass you the mic.
So I'm still in. I'm the Director of Emergency at John Hunter Hospital.
Oh, great.
So I want to go back to the beginning and ask, do you now have any suggestions as to how to fix the problem from within?
Great question. So the other thing that I'm part of is the Australian Clinical Entrepreneurship Program, which is a program we brought over from the NHS. And the NHS have been doing this for a number of years, because they were realising there was lots of clinicians leaving the healthcare system, and because of frustrations with the system, and they had great innovative ideas and no one was listening to them, so I sort of felt that pain. But what they did was they said, how do we A, solve the innovation problem, B, solve the workforce problem? Let's keep these people in and teach them how to be entrepreneurs within the system. And so we brought that program over to Australia. We launched it a couple of months ago and had the first couple of pit stops where we teach people about how to run a business. But many of those are people working within the system. So they are, specialists and junior doctors who've come up with solutions. And I'm a big believer in entrepreneurship as well. So if you think about all the people that leave with great ideas, if you could keep them in and implement those great ideas within a system, then you're going to be even better for it, because you've kept the talent, you've actually brought innovation into your healthcare system, and you're going to benefit. But you can also give the person that machinery to actually bring that thing to life, versus them going out having to raise capital and trying to get into other healthcare systems. And the great thing is we've realised that people were making a decision between, do I leave medicine, or do I and do my startup, or do I stay in and kill my idea and just be miserable and unhappy? And then as soon as you gave them an option to say, you can still keep practicing, but if you have a day off a week where you work on your idea, we can support you. The longevity of their career, their satisfaction, their ability to keep contributing to the healthcare system was solving the workforce issue as well. So I think if we can do more of that in terms of being flexible with supporting people, but also giving them the skills. So most clinicians do not learn about business at all. Even when they go out and open their own practices, have no idea what they're doing. And Greg's done this for many years in helping doctors with their practices, knows we're some of the worst people when it comes to business. But we're teaching them things, like we did a design thinking workshop with them last week. And you had plastic surgeon in the room, gastroenterologists, nurses, podiatrists in the room. And we use a Stanford model and many of you heard of D-School. And they were just, minds were blown, like that design thinking was a thing, and they were then applying that back into their healthcare system and how they design their product for innovation. And so that kind of stuff, I think if you can bring that into the healthcare system, we would change it. So it's a long-winded answer to your question, but I think more programs like that where we can find the balance is the way to go.
Is the idea then for that clinical entrepreneurs program to be launched nationally?
So it's in 3 states at the moment. So we've got New South Wales, WA and Victoria, and it's a pilot program so funded by MTP Connect. So if it goes well for the first 1 or 2 years, then we will roll it out nationally, and then obviously other universities can be involved. So at the moment it's just UWA and Melbourne Uni that are kind of managing it, but it is being run in New South Wales.
I've got a question. I know you just started Main Secrets, and I'm curious how your first couple of weeks have been. So you're in the tent. Any insight how it's been?
Thanks, Virginia. You can't report this back to the rest of the team. No, I'm just kidding. Look, it's been both overwhelming, exciting, and terrifying at the same time. And I think terrifying because I realise that there's so much that I don't know. And you know, when you get to this point in your career, you've done a lot, but you realise there's always stuff you can learn. And I think the learning aspect is really scary in a way, but it's also super exciting. And so the first couple of weeks have been, it's kind of like moments where I have to pinch myself and go, I can't believe I'm here and this is what I get to do, because every day the stuff that I do, I feel like I just do fun stuff, and then that's like part of a job. Like, people have jobs like this. So it's been incredible. And I think what also really struck me over the first couple of weeks is that the team that I work with, I'm not saying this just because you're in the room, but you would agree with me, are some of the most passionate people I have ever met. And it takes passion to work in venture and innovation and working with founders, and I can probably say the same for you guys. It's not something you do for the money. You don't do it because you're going to get rich. You do it because you love watching these things grow and evolve and become something really impactful. And so I love just feeding off the passion and the vibe in the room. And sometimes in healthcare, for those of you still in the health system, know that it can get a bit not depressing, but like you hear all the problems and you're constantly like, oh, it's so hard to fix. And you know, but when you're around a whole bunch of people who are constantly like, we can fix this, we can do this, there's amazing opportunities, like let's chase that innovation, let's look at that research, let's commercialise that. There is that sense of constant, you know, optimism about the future, and that's really refreshing to work with people like that. So it's been a great couple of weeks, but I've got so much to learn.
So when you're working with founders within the Australian arrangements, do you find that there's a difference between individuals that are focusing full-time on their project and individuals who are torn between multiple jobs and ideas and projects?
Yeah, good question. So we often meet people when they've just got that foot hovering over, do I go into this full time or not? Because often it's the financial aspects that make it difficult to step into a founder's shoes full time, because you have to give up a job and an income. But what I find is that the people who do it move much faster. So, you know, I've got specialists, you know, who are doing full-time specialty work, and then their startup is a side hustle. And you'll find it might take a year to do the same thing that you would have done in a month if they were full-time on it. So my concern is that if you're not first to market for your thing, or you don't move quickly, you kind of lose momentum, you lose interest, or you know, someone else beats you to it. So it depends on how committed you are, but I think if you can find a way to, you know, sustain yourself financially, I'd say that, you know, the best way to do it is to try and step in full time, or at least majority of the time. So, you know, it doesn't have to be 5 days a week. Founders don't work 5 days a week, but you know what I mean? Like, you could still do a little bit, but I think when you're trying to do a full-time clinical role and then you've got your part-time thing, it's very hard to turn that into a full-on fledged business, you know, in a short period of time. So there is a difference we see in terms of speed to market.
I'm a health tech developer, so we build a lot of tech for all this work. One of the things that I've found is a lot of pushback. So for example, we built an audiometric sensor for cough analysis. We went 2 years ago before COVID to the doctors and were like, what sort of sourcing is this? Can we do that? Can we measure cough sounds? Then we did the PPG to measure blood pressure.
You don't work for ResApp, do you? No.
Well, we licensed a couple of tech to do.
Okay, all right. Sorry. We had that offline conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we work on those things, but we also find a lot of pushback all the time. Like, how do we navigate through clinical studies and better manage that? That's
really, really hard, and it's a great question. The default position is always no, I find in healthcare, until you really tackle a pain point. So, you find the most difficult part of whatever, their workflow or their process or their access issue or whatever it might be. And if you can solve that, you can then build that trust and then slowly expand to other things. So maybe, cough isn't the main thing that is their problem. But if you come in with something else and you solve it, then that might be a foot in the door. And I found that persistence is key, but also picking the right people. So if you can find a couple of, sort of more, we talk about that adoption curve, and you find the people who are those early adopters, and they are out there. There's more and more clinicians like myself who are willing to try new things. You find a few of those, and they're your advocates, and then they've got connections into whether it's peak bodies or into corporate chains of clinics or whatever it might be, and they start preaching about it, because it's hard for you to sell, but it's easy for us to sell to our peers. So you use that effect, but it's hard to find the specific people who are going to be advocates of your product. But once you find them, you hold on to them and you use them. Because I think people don't leverage that enough, is that in medicine we're very much like, we'll trust our peers over we'll trust someone externally, because we feel like everyone's trying to take advantage of us. I don't know why. People actually just want to help us. But I do think finding those people is going to be the key. But you're not alone. It's, they're just very conscious about risk and, don't like black box things.
Because you have to build the sort of data sets to train the AI, for example.
Yeah.
So what we did was we used Mexico and India to collect data to convince doctors here, this is how this would work. But none of the doctors here in Australia were actually willing to participate. So we had to outsource law files and data files outside of Australia. But then that was the only option, and now everyone listens again now.
And you've also got it on a different population. So that's going to have some bias if it's in an AI product. I think you're right, and I've seen everyone have to do that because Australia is a little bit conservative in that area, and there is a bit more resistance in terms of, being able to share data. Everyone's a bit suspicious of everything, and and explainability is really important. So if you can find a way to really explain how you come to what you come, it's important for clinicians, I think, because they don't like just put it into this machine and it'll spit something out. They don't like that.
Good advice, thank you.
I've got two questions. The first is the Australian Medical Angels, is it still a thing? Are you still looking for investors for that? I've got a few doctors in the family who are probably looking for somewhere to put their money in. It'd be quite interesting.
Yes, it's still a thing. So while I'm focusing on Main Sequence, my co-founder is still running it. So they're in a bit of a restructure at the moment, because they've actually had a lot of non-doctors come and say, hey, I would like to invest in something that a group of doctors has decided is worth investing in. So they're actually in a process of broadening out the other professionals that could come into rounds, which will obviously mean that there'll be more access to capital and things. But definitely there's on the website there's a hello@medangels.com address. If you send it there, don't send it to me because it gets lost in like 1,000 emails. But definitely send it to them if you've got people that are interested in signing up. Yeah.
And the second part would be, how would you think the government can make investing in medtech more attractive for VCs? Because there's a lot of VCs who are very interested in SaaS, and because they're easy to spin out, and there's a lot of value that they can get made very quickly. Whereas with medtech, all the regulations that you just said, they're very important, having regulations. Is there a way for the government to make it more attractive for VCs to come in and invest in medtech? Because I know that a lot of VCs just won't touch it because of the regulatory process. Yeah,
the regulatory pathway can be scary, and this is what I was saying about COVID. It was really interesting to watch the TGA kind of have to quickly, become agile, which is not something you would associate with TGA naturally. But I have colleagues that work for the TGA, and they said it was, obviously incredible experience to have to, like as a large regulatory body, have to pivot really quickly. But if you look at things like FDA, where they have the breakthrough sort of process, lots of other countries are starting to find ways to make sure that they can expedite new technologies and support them. So for example, for AI products, you can't, every time the AI changes, you can't go back through FDA because it's a new product. It's like drugs are the same, right? You build a drug, it's got the same composition. So you prove it, it's approved. But AI changing all the time. So you've got to find new ways to regulate that industry, and you've got to find ways that don't slow it down to the point where it's actually hindering, you know, technology advancement. Because if you say to someone it's going to take a year before you'll get through this, within a year that technology is already out of date and you have to start all over again. So we're entering a different era, and the biggest problem I think regulatory bodies like TGA have is they don't have talent. They don't have people who work within TGA, or even the FDA had this problem, CE had this problem. It's a global issue, where how do you attract people who understand AI and technology to come in and work in regulatory bodies when they really want to work in, you know, where all the action's happening. And so they were just struggling to find people who would come in and understand, happy to work for government and understand that sector to help founders and startups and VCs understand what is the regulatory pathway. And so I think everyone just gets scared and says, as soon as there's a regulatory pathway, we don't want to be involved. But you need to change that by having processes that support that to happen more quickly.
Is that next on your list? So you main sequence, like one of Australia's, you know, premier deep tech VCs, is the next step is to go and, you know, change government?
Well, I don't think it needs to be a next step. I think it'll be at the same time. I think, you know, you can, the great thing about main sequence is because they are, you know, attached to CSIRO, you get a lot of exposure to government, and I think you can have a lot of influence. Virginia, I'm probably talking a bit out of term here, but you would know this. Like, you work quite closely, right, with, you know, federal government. So I think there's an opportunity to say, how do you, you know, turbocharge this sector? These are our suggestions of what could make it more attractive for founders to get into this space, for venture capital to fund it, and I think they would listen.
Thanks for sharing your inspiring stories. Just jumping down to my questions. Do you have any advice for a student who wants to become an entrepreneur? Is that the question?
Do I have any advice for someone who's, so you're still studying at the university? Yeah, look, I would say get involved early. So doing this kind of stuff, like if I could have my time back again, because I didn't even realise, you know, that you could go down the startup path or be an entrepreneur until very late in my career, or later in my career. And I keep thinking if I'd had this opportunity for networking, meeting people, like it might have just allowed me to do some things early on. But I think, you know, with this startup space, it's really about getting out there and networking, meeting people, because everything that's happened to me, I think, has been being in the right place at the right time. I'd like to say it was all, you know, how amazing I am, but I don't think that was it. I think a lot of it was just that I was just so hungry and thirsty for knowledge that I would go to all these events, I would want to meet people, I would want to learn from them. And then people see that enthusiasm and passion and they say, do you want to come and do something with us? And the more I did that, the more I just, you know, it was an exponential effect. So I'd say if you want to get some experience, like find a really cool company and just approach them. Don't wait for job ads or anything, and just say, hey, can I come and intern with you? Can I come hang out with you? And a lot of startups are desperate for, you know, people to come and work with them. Like they're always short-staffed. They're always looking for somebody who's enthusiastic. And many of the people that I've connected who were students, like medical students, connected them into startups just to get some exposure, then go on to get jobs with them. And so then they're doing part-time sort of training, whatever specialty, and they're also working with the startup. And some of them have actually then quit, the medical stuff and gone on founded their own company. That's not my goal, is to take people away from that sector. But they've been amazing founders and have built great companies. So I'd say early exposure, reach out to companies, go to lots of networking events. VCs put on a lot of stuff, go to those, meet VCs, because founders are also in the room. But yeah, be prepared to give up your evenings and other times, because there are always, you know, events, so many events on.
Thank you so much. But my second question is, because I'm really into health tech, and yeah, it's nutrition and dietetics?
Yeah, okay, great question. I'm sure most people in the audience could probably answer that for you. I don't code, right? I'm not a technical startup person. You don't have to be technical. There are plenty of people who build great technology. So sometimes I liken it to somebody saying, I want to work in healthcare. Do I go and do a medical degree to work in healthcare, you know, because I want to build a health tech product? And I'm like, no, you don't need to be a doctor. Like, that'll be the part that I play. What part do you play? And so I think stick to what you're good at and what you're interested in, and then you can always find, you know, co-founders or services. There are even companies that will build apps for you that, you know, take sort of de-risk that part of it until you find the right co-founder. But the best teams I found for startups are people that have representation from different parts, and they build this really great, strong team with complementary skills. The ones where I feel like they struggle a little bit is where they try to do everything. Where they're like, I'm the medical person, I also did a law degree, and I've done a business degree, and I'm also coding in my spare time, and I'm gonna run this startup on my own. And those ones I get worried about, because you can never do anything really well. So my advice is, unless you're really interested in coding, you know, leave that to the people whose life mission it is to code and build tech, and you focus on the stuff the value that you're gonna bring, which is your, you know, your background, your healthcare professional background.
Compared to, in terms of your angels, compared to investing in a post-TGA product, how do you explain to them the risk and the process involved in investing before and letting a product go through TGA, and if it doesn't pass approval?
Yeah, good question. I have to say, I think it's a better audience going to clinicians because they get TGA than going to non-clinicians who really worry about that process, because most of us are familiar with, you know, how the TGA works. We know the kinds of things that get through, and to be honest, I've seen a lot of companies who don't get through TGA will go FDA, will go CE, and then kind of come back on a backward route. So I think if you can see pathways in other countries, that's certainly an appeal. But I think people also know that things are constantly changing, and there is also an opportunity to have input into the product where you can make it, you know, regulatory friendly. So as long as the company's willing to work with the group, I think there's actually a benefit in having that to say what is going to get this through. And I'm thinking more, less so for devices, but more for like software as a medical device, because you can pick, like, you know, so we had a company recently who had a product that was going to solve all these mental health issues, but also could solve phobias. And we're like, let's just stick to the phobias for now, because you might not then need to go down the regulatory path. Prove yourself out there, and then once you've got a product and, you know, we've got all this traction, then we can start branching out into real medical conditions, and then we can navigate TGA if we have to. But I think you will actually get good advice from people pre-regulatory from groups like that. Might be jobs going, because you will know.
So when you said when you're a clinician and you were like, I could do that specialty or this specialty, like it's all amazing and wonderful, how did you not do that? Like everything.
What are you doing? What's your background?
I'm a nuclear medicine scientist.
Yeah.
I've been for about 12 years, but I have just left because
Yeah.
COVID.
Yeah.
And what you were saying about, you know, you feel like you have to get an MBA to be able to do something in business. Well, I'm enrolled in an MBA.
Yeah, okay. No, don't stop it. But I think getting some exposure, like I think a lot of healthcare professionals have this tick box thing where we're like, you have to get the qualification to be able to go and do the job. I think in other industries, it's like, go get the job and then figure out what you want to learn about, right? It's kind of flipped. And I didn't realise this because I'm like, oh, I need to get all, I've got, you know, too many degrees, and I didn't need to, right? I just went out there, kept going, oh, I've got to accumulate all of this to be qualified to do X. Because we're so used to being accredited for things, you've got to get, you know, this qualification, that fellowship. And so you'll find, you know, doctors and other healthcare professionals get pulled into that, let's do the qualification first. But what happens is you spend 3 years doing the qualification, and then that's not really what you want to do with your life. So my advice is get work experience. So go out there, work with companies that you think you might be interested in, and most of them, if you just approach them and you're enthusiastic and you're not sitting there expecting, I think one of the problems also is that you're paid quite well as a healthcare professional, and I'm the first person to admit that, you know, sometimes we could be overpaid, but you know, when you go into other industries and people have amazing impacts in other roles and they get paid much less, it's not always about the money. And there's plenty of times in my career that I have taken pay cuts, and people are like, that's so weird, don't you like normally get more money as you go further in your career? But it's like as soon as you do that, new doors open and new opportunities, and it's about waking up every day and loving what you do, because you have to do it for a long time. So my advice is, if you can get a foot in the door with getting actually experience and working with a kind of company that you might want to work with, before you commit to, I'm going to do this degree, or I'm going to go learn coding, or I'm going to, you know, do this business or law degrees. Number of doctors that go and do law degrees, I don't know why, but I think they just think that's another, you know, whole career path for them, and they get to the end, they're like, now what? So yeah, so I think work experience is the best way to do it.
Thank you. I think we've got time for another question. James.
By the way, I just want to say I loved your response to, I think it was Airtree, was it Paul Bassett?
Yeah.
Yes, who put up a comment on LinkedIn, and I think I read your feedback, which was really enlightening. Sorry?
When I asked him to pitch to me.
Yes, I love that. I was like, that was brave, but...
We are taking offers for medical, so.
Oh, right, okay. Did he offer to pitch to you?
No, I think he just says we, but no, he's pretty good.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, my question, so you are doing the clinical entrepreneur program in Victoria and Western Australia. Is it because their health systems are a bit more open? Like, we're looking for a public partnership.
New South Wales is also part of the pilot. They just don't have a university partner here. So it's New South Wales Health is the partner.
Okay.
So it's definitely, so they are taking applications again, and I think the next cohort will start early next year. So the great thing about that program, even, I mean, you're advanced, like there's a lot of stuff that you don't need to learn in terms of the course, but it gets you in front of decision makers in New South Wales Health.
Sorry, I was more asking, which state would you recommend trying to partner with? Like, we're rejected by New South Wales Health yesterday.
Oh, wow, okay.
We're just looking to which state we could maybe do a pilot with, or...
Which do I think is the most innovative, forward-thinking state? To be careful here, this is being recorded. Look, it's...
Two, and then it's not like you're not favourites then.
Sorry, pick two. Look, I think they all have different areas of interest. So it's figuring out whatever problem you're trying to solve, like which is the state that at the moment is focusing on it. So you'll see sort of strategic priorities for all of them, you know, when they write their fancy reports, and they'll say, we've got, so for example, in South Australia, hospital ramping is a massive problem. So if you went in there and you had something that was going to solve ramping, which includes like virtual care services in EDs and things like that, yeah, right now they'd be like, that's our priority, come in. But if you went and tried to solve ramping in New South Wales, and I'm like, that's not such an issue at the moment for us now. So it's really time specific about what's on their agenda at the time. But I would say it might even be worth trying with a smaller state, because sometimes the big states, the bureaucracy is, you know, kind of a bit overwhelming. So if you go to like a smaller state like NT or, you know, Tasmania, like going into those, because it's less levels to decision makers, that might be a way to get in the door. Once you've proved it out in one health system, it's much easier, because they all get competitive, to translate it into it. I think New South Wales and Victoria are great states, but they're so complex. Yeah.
We're going to have to wrap it up there, because I know Amandeep has to drive back to Sydney very soon.
Great, yes.
So thank you so much. If we can
That's
all
all right.
give a round of applause.